The title of this message is a question. Want more faith? We were talking about that not too long ago in Bible study. So I'm going to allow Jesus to show us today how he may increase our faith. But before I get into it, I want to ask you, why are you here today? Isn't it because we're commanded to assemble on the Sabbath day? Why do you attend the holy days? Feast of Trumpets and everything. Isn't it because we are commanded to? Why do we not eat pork and catfish and scallops and garbage and junk and stuff that we don't need to eat? Because we're commanded to observe clean and unclean meats. There are other things that I don't have time to mention, but when we're commanded, and we do what we're commanded, let's see what Christ said about that. Turn with me to Luke 17. And I'm going to begin reading. Then said he unto the disciples, it is impossible, but that offenses will come. There will be those who will offend you. But woe unto those from whom they come. It were better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck and he cast into the sea, than that he should offend one of these little ones. Now, you might be thinking ahead of what Christ is saying here. Let's clear our minds of, like my last message to you, Jesus was not that concerned that he's going to hurt someone's feelings. He called certain ones hypocrites. He called them snakes. He began talking to the lady at the well, and she didn't come there to do anything but draw water. I showed you that. So let's think and listen to what Christ says. He says, take heed to yourselves, talking to his disciples, and therefore to us. If your brother trespass against you, forgive him because you're such a nice person, and you got to. No, he says, rebuke him. And if he repents, forgive him. Does that sound like what you've heard coming up in some of the churches? I came up in some of those churches. And if he trespass against you 7 times in a day, and 7 times in a day turn again to you, saying, I repent, you shall forgive him. What was the response of the disciples? Verse 5, and the disciples said unto him, Lord, increase our faith, so that we will be able to forgive 7 times a day when someone sins against us and says, I'm sorry. They said, please increase our faith. He's going to tell you one condition on which he will not increase your faith. It's important to know what he will do and what he will not do. Let's continue reading. The Lord said, if you had faith as a grain of mustard seed, and in another place he talks about the mustard seed as being the smallest of seeds. So he's not saying if you had faith as a watermelon seed or a pumpkin seed or a peach seed or avocado seed. He's saying if you had faith which is compared to the smallest of seeds, you might say unto this mountain, be you plucked up by the roots, and be you planted in the sea, and it should obey you. Verse 7, but is a connecting word. It's like and, or therefore, or wherefore. He says, if you had faith that would compare in size to a little tiny mustard seed, you could do great things, but which of you having a servant plowing in the field or feeding cattle will say unto him by and by when he has come from the field, go and sit down to meat? Hey, I'm going to take care of you now. And will not rather say unto him, make ready wherewith I may sup or eat, and gird yourself and serve me till I have eaten and drunken, and afterward you shall eat and drink. Do you think, or does he think that servant because he did the things which were commanded him? Christ said, no. We're commanded to be here. Are we doing God a favor for being here? No, we're commanded to be here. What does he say in the next one? So likewise you, when you have done all these things which are commanded you, say, we are unprofitable servants. We have done that which was our duty to do. So Jesus Christ is telling the disciples, I will not increase your faith if all you do is what I command you to do. I had a sermon some time ago about the faith of Jesus Christ is what we have to have for salvation. It's not the little weak human faith that we can come up with. We have to receive the faith of Jesus Christ. As Paul said, and I began that sermon with Ephesians 1 verse 8, we are saved by faith, and that is not of ourselves. It is a gift from God. Jesus Christ is in charge of faith. He owns faith. He will give you more faith on his terms. Let's turn over to Matthew 17 and see a little bit more about what he says about the mustard seed and faith. I'll get to it. I usually have it marked and I can flip to it before you guys can get there, but I think most of you are there before I am. Okay, in the 17th chapter of Matthew, I'm going to start reading with, just a minute. May as well start with 17. Well, let's get the gist of it. Let's start with 14. And when they were come, to the multitude, there came to him a certain man kneeling down to him and saying, Lord, have mercy on my son, for he is a lunatic and sore vexed. For oft times he falls into the fire and oft into the water. And I brought him unto your disciples, and they could not cure him. And then Jesus said, O you of little faith. Remember, that was in my sermonette. Christ told his disciples, you guys don't have enough faith. You need to increase faith. And he's telling us here how to increase how he will increase our faith. But he said, O faithless and perverse generations. He's saying this to his disciples that he's chosen to lead his church. He calls them a perverse generation and faithless. How long shall I be with you? How long shall I suffer you? Bring him hither to me. And Jesus rebuked the devil, and he departed out of him, and the child was cured from that very hour. Then came his disciples to Jesus apart and said, Why could not we cast him out? And Jesus said unto them, Because you were unbelieving, because of your unbelief, because you had little faith, because you are a perverse generation. For I verily say unto you, again, he's going to talk about the mustard seed. If you had faith as a grain of mustard seed, ye shall say unto this mountain, remove. First of all, we saw you can remove a tree. Now he's talking about a mountain. And nothing shall be impossible unto you if you have faith, which would compare to a mustard seed. How do you get that faith? By building it up within yourself? No, it is the gift of God through Jesus Christ. He will increase your faith if you do more than just being obedient to what you're commanded. What does it say here? Howbeit this kind, healing, the ability to pray for the healing of someone, this kind goes not out but by prayer and fasting. I don't know about you, but I have fasted since the Day of Atonement. Have you? Is there any reason that you would fast on any other day than the Day of Atonement when you're commanded to do so? Jesus said, if you want more faith, fast and pray, and he will give it, because he will see your sincere desire and your earnest intention to please God. But we're not doing God a favor when we obey and do only what we're required to do. You understand what I'm saying? We've got to go beyond what we're required to do. If you want more faith, choose a day between now and atonement this year that you will fast for a whole day. Fasting only once a year might make you deathly sick on Day of Atonement. I know people in God's church who get deathly sick having to obey the command to afflict your soul on the Day of Atonement. You know, when you're using muscles, they stay in shape. If you stop using your muscles and sit around and do nothing as a couch potato, you'll fall apart. So if you don't fast on any other day than when you're commanded, I guarantee it's going to be rough on you. So let's fast and pray, and God and Jesus Christ will increase our faith, and we need more faith.
Okay, the title of this message is Understanding Our Hard Times Fully is Impossible. Not until we become a member of God's family we really understand why God lets us experience hard times and hard knocks. So understanding our hard times fully is impossible. People ask, well, why does God allow me to go through whatever hard knocks you've been through in your life? We won't really completely understand it until we join God's family. It's like when we get there, we'll have a perspective that's so much greater and deeper and broader than we have now. So like a child understanding when you tell them, you cannot eat candy all day long. The kid says, but why? And, you know, maybe I'm sure the God thing's much broader than that, but you get the idea. We, of course, partially understand, I'm sure, as we think back over the last 5 years, some things we've gone through, that it's been good for us. And I think actually it's true of all mankind. When God resurrects the billions of people in the great white throne, and they reflect on their life of, in most cases, poverty and all the things that they went through, they will have learned some things that will hold them in good stead in the future when they eventually get to God's family. In other words, everything we learn has value to us. Matter of fact, they say that you learn more from losing than you do winning. Just something to think about. Sometimes when things go your way, you think it's because I'm so smart or clever. A lot of times you just got lucky and everything, and you just don't know all the breaks you got because sometimes you don't see it. But when things go badly, you reflect more, you think more. But I think we're going to learn more from our experiences someday in the future, because God is deeper and understanding than we are. And it's a big difference that we can't even appreciate now. So right now, we can never know why, but we're learning important things and important attitudes, but we can't fully appreciate it now. But when we become a spirit being, when we join God's family, we're going to be, I really believe this, we're going to be very thankful for the hard knocks that we've been through, the different kinds of experiences. That right now we say, well, why doesn't God make everything easy for me and smooth? I mean, God could do that, and sometimes he does, but not always. We're going to be thankful for the hard knocks. I'm going to read 1 Corinthians 13:9. For we know, this is Paul writing to the Corinthians, for we know in part, and we prophesy in part, but when that which is perfect has come, in other words, once we get to God's kingdom and we're spirit beings, then that which is in part will be done away. When I was a child, I spoke as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. He's saying, compared to the spiritual insight we will someday have, we're like children. Let's say compare a 5-year-old with a 30 or 40-year-old man. It's that kind of comparison on insight. Verse 12, for now we see in a mirror dimly. In other words, when we look at why we experience things and the lessons we learn, we're looking at a mirror. We see things, but we only see them dimly. But then, when we're in God's kingdom, we'll see them face to face. Now I know in part. And Paul knew a lot. Paul knew a lot, but he said, I only know in part. But then I shall know, just as I also am known. But here's the key. While we're suffering our hard knocks, or whatever problems we have to trust God, that God knows best no matter what. We have to believe and trust that God knows best no matter what. Because you think, wait a minute, why does God end this and make things smooth and easy for me? God knows best. We have to believe that, know it, believe it. Even though we cannot understand everything now, we have to trust God knows best, and somehow it will work out to our benefit, or somewhere in the future, partly in this age, but much, much, much more so in the world to come, we will be stronger because of the hard knocks we went through now. We'll be wiser. We'll be more compassionate, and I could add a whole lot of other adjectives onto that. And verse 13 basically talks about the big three, but it starts off with faith, and really, of the big three, that's the one we're going to focus on now, faith. Faith that you trust God knows best, and whatever is happening. Now, obviously, we can make stupid mistakes and make things harder on ourselves. But even that is a learning experience. Think about it for a minute. You do something stupid, and God lets you learn a hard lesson. It's still ultimately to your spiritual benefit. I'm not saying do stupid things. You know I'm not saying that. But if you do, it's still to your benefit. As long as you come back to God. You don't just keep tacking, go bad, 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 worse. You know I don't mean that, of course. But have trust. No matter what happens, see and feel that God knows best. I'm going to read Philippians 3:21. Philippians 3:21 says, who shall change our vile body? I want to emphasize the word vile body. As you get older, that actually starts to mean more than it. When you're young and healthy, you don't see it. But anyway, as you get older, it makes a little more sense. Change our vile body that it may be fashioned like unto his glorious body. Now, someday we'll have a spiritual body. We'll be baby gods in God's family. According to his glorious body, and working whereby we're able even to subdue all things unto himself. I would argue that we have a vile body, but we also have a vile mind. Because we don't really fully understand the things of God, the high spiritual things. Jeremiah 17:9 says, the human heart is desperately wicked. Who can know it? And you can look at people and you can almost listen to them. And whatever they accuse the other guy of, that's what they're guilty of. The hypocrisy is like running high in the world. Well, that's human nature in the raw. But someday we won't have a vile mind. We'll have a spiritual mind. And then we'll be capable of fully appreciating the deep spiritual lessons we're learning now. But what I want to say is, even though we don't fully understand it, try to appreciate that God is building something in you. No matter what you're suffering, it will ultimately be to your benefit. Appreciate what God is doing. Because someday when we're a baby God, then we'll know and we'll appreciate it. Someday we'll be very appreciative of our hard knocks. I know that's hard to believe now. But let me give you an example. I'm going to take the example of Abraham, the father of the faithful. Now, you all know that Abraham had to move from where he was and go to the promised land. And I don't even think he fully understood why God wanted him to see the land that his ancestors would inherit. And he was childless. And you know the story between him and his wife, Sarah. And as an old man, he finally had a child. And that child grew up, and they loved him so much. And he realized, well, through that child, all these promises God made will come true. Because he said, like, he was already rich with camels and sheep and goat. And he said, God, what are you going to give me? 100 more sheep? Well, I don't really need that. I need a son, an heir. You understand how he felt. Well, he finally got the son. He did. And then I'm going to Genesis 22:1. Genesis 22:1. He had a son, and God said, now it came to pass after these things, God tested Abraham. And I guess that's the right word, or maybe you could use, there are other adjectives you could put in there. but at least you can say he gave him some hard knocks. God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, here I am. Take now your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love. Notice God understood how much he loved Isaac. So it wasn't like God didn't appreciate the situation. Whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah. They believe it's pretty much the same place upon which Christ was crucified. Probably is true. And offer him there as a burnt offering on the mountain, which I shall tell you. When he got to the place, Abraham was thunderstruck. Are you kidding me? I waited all these years. Now the kid's grown up. He's a beautiful young man, and you want me to sacrifice him? Now, let's put ourselves in Abraham's shoes for a minute. Abraham did not know how God was going to make this good. Now, think about it. Well, maybe he'll resurrect him, but why bother? Abraham couldn't see any value in what God was doing. Now, realize Abraham did not know that, I believe it's like a 10-day period. Then 10 days, at the last second, God would rescue Isaac. Abraham didn't know that, and God didn't tell him that. So all those 10 days, he was mourning the loss of his only son. But he trusted God and did what God said. He somehow realized that somehow God is good, God is gracious. It's got to work out. But he didn't understand. It was very hard on him. He had no idea that Isaac would be rescued. And during those 10 days, he mourned his son. And I bet he said in his prayers, I'm speculating now, but I bet he said things like, God, if you need a great sacrifice, take me, I'm an old man, let Isaac live. And God probably said, no, I said Isaac. I'm just speculating. And I'm sure he said, well, what if I offer you all my sheep and goats? And, God's probably said no to that too. I don't think Abraham realized, and probably even when he died, he probably didn't fully realize it, that experience would make him like God the Father. Because God the Father, and there's a 10-day period when they set aside the lamb that's going to be sacrificed to Passover. And when Jesus rode into Jerusalem that last day, God the Father knew what Christ was going through. I think what God the Father is letting Abraham experience, and he'll appreciate it more in the kingdom, he experienced what God the Father experienced when Jesus Christ was led to the point of his crucifixion. And I think the message to us is it was harder for God the Father than it was for Jesus Christ the Son. I mean, you got to think about that, but I really think that's the message. It was hard on both of them, but it was harder for the Father to give up his Son, just like Abraham was a father of the faithful. And I'm sure Abraham appreciated it after the fact, but I believe he'll appreciate it even more and everyone will look up to Abraham like the elder son. He's a father of the faithful. He experienced what God the Father experienced when his son was led into Jerusalem that final time, especially the last 3 days. And well, anyway, you get the general idea. But Abraham didn't know that during that period. He had to just trust God knew what he was doing. He had no idea he'd be rescued. He'd become the father of the faithful. We should be thankful. I know this sounds crazy. I was afraid to say it, but we should be thankful for hard knocks. When something goes bad, you scream, God, aren't you making things smooth and easy and nice for me? There probably is a purpose. We won't fully know it until we're there in the kingdom. But be thankful for everything that happens to you. I know that's... Now, obviously, I'm not saying you shouldn't try to solve problems, get out of your crisis, see whatever lesson God wants you to learn and straighten it out. But in the meanwhile, be thankful for everything. And that includes hard knocks. Someday when we're resurrected, we will appreciate it when we look back at the past. Be thankful for every experience, and then we'll fully understand the value of it. Now, I want to tell you a corny joke. I'll kind of make a point of it. It's called Male Logic. Male logic is flawless. That's the title of this joke. Okay. There's a conversation between a man and his wife, and the wife asks him 7 questions, and he answers briefly The man asked the wife one question, and she stumped. The woman says, "Do you drink beer?" The man says, "Yes." She says, "How many beers do you drink a day?" He says, "Usually about 3. The woman says, "Well, how much do you pay for each beer?" "About $5 most of the time." The woman says, "Well, how long have you been drinking beer like this?" He says, 20 years. And the woman says, "So a beer costs $5. You've been drinking 3 beers a day. That puts your spending each month at $450 a month. And 1 year you spent over $5,000 drinking beer, correct?" The man says, "Yes." The woman says, "Do you know that if you stopped drinking beer and you had saved up all that money for 20 years, you could have bought an airplane by now?" The man asked her one question, "Do you drink beer?" Her answer is no. He says, "Where's your airplane?" The reason I told that corny joke, "Where's your airplane?" or yacht, we people think we have great ideas. Like, let's stop drinking beer. I don't care if you drink beer or not, but and we'll do great things with the money. But it doesn't work that way, does it? We have great ideas, but it doesn't work the way we think it will. Well, let's take David, for instance. I believe these times are right. For approximately 8 years, David was an outlaw running for his life against Saul and the major army of Israel. And then for another 7 years, there was a kind of a civil war. So it took 15 years for David to get to an undivided crown as king. Even though God promised and anointed him by Samuel, he said, "You will be the king of Israel." Now you're going to ask yourself, and David probably did, why? Why doesn't God give me a smooth pathway to the crown? I get there and, live in a palace and, all that kingly stuff. Yes, your majesty. Instead, I'm out here as an outlaw. Why did God do that? I'm just going to speculate a little bit about it, and you can think about it too. I'm sure David really had no idea. But my first speculation is David learned a lot from being an outlaw. David was like Robin Hood. He really was. And his merry band of men, he was really like Robin Hood. It made David tougher, a better warrior, a better leader, and he got used to saving people from villains, which is a good thing for a king to get used to doing. And I think he learned a lot of things during his outlaw days that if he was in a palace comfortable, he would not have learned. I'm going to turn to 1 Samuel 25:14. This is just one example. There are a bunch of them. David gets a lot of ink in the Bible, but we're just going to look at 2 things here. 1 Samuel 25:14. Now one of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, "Look, David sent messengers from the wilderness to greet our master, and he reviled them. But the men were very good to us." He means the men of David's little army. "We were not hurt, nor did we miss anything as long as they accompanied them when we were in the field. They were like a wall to us by day and night." In other words, a wall means, these shepherds have these sheep and they're roaming around the hillside. And sheep were worth a lot of money. They were. Well, actually, they're worth a lot of money today, too, to tell you the truth. But they're worth a lot of money. And David's men were like a wall. There were all kinds of thieves, villains, and all kinds of marauders off the desert in Judah. They had a lot of problems with people stealing lambs, but not when David's men guarded them. So all during that, whatever kind of season that is, where the lambs are out there fattening themselves up, David's men were like a wall protecting that big farm section for their lambs, night and day. All the time we were keeping them shielded. And by the way, when you think about food and shelter, remember, they didn't have Walmarts like we do today. If you lived in some little farming community and brigands stole most of your sheep or stole most of your harvest, guess what happened to you the rest of that year? You starved, or almost starved. Or maybe you have to go to the next village, see if any relatives give anything. But it wasn't like, well, we just lost a couple hundred lambs. We'll go to Walmart and buy some hot dogs. No, it was a whole different world. And literally, your life was on the line, getting your harvest in and taking care of your sheep, cattle. I want you to put it in that context, so it's not like we have it today. Matter of fact, actually, our mechanized food supply, probably go back 180 years, people didn't have any of that stuff. If they didn't get a good crop in, it was hard knocks or starvation. So keep that in mind. And David learned camaraderie, and he protected those people, and he protected their sheep, and his men did. He took care of the weak. I think David gained both physically, because riding all around, running off brigands, and riding a horse with your sword, that's probably very healthy stuff. They say riding a horse a long distance is harder than it looks. On TV it looks easy, but believe me, it's not as easy as it looks. We've been giving our grandkids horseback riding lessons. Nothing's as easy as it looks. But I think it also made David spiritually stronger too. And I'll bet there were days when David was living the decadent life of a king in a palace, and he looked back on his outlaw days and said, maybe they weren't so bad after all. We had fun chasing the brigands away and, all the many adventures he had. By the way, one of his adventures that must have reinforced his faith, there was a time they were in the mountains. There's a little bit of backstory of some people betraying him, but Saul's army had him cornered, and Saul had thousands of troops, and David and his little merry men were trapped some little mountaintop ridge, and Saul's army was about to close in. And suddenly God rescued him. Saul got news that the Philistines had a major invasion, and he had to go and fight them. I believe if Saul knew for sure David was there, he would have said, forget about the Philistines, burning villages. I want to get David first. That's how crazy he was. But he withdrew. But David had all kinds of up and down adventures that made David's faith stronger, believe it or not, than if he had been in a palace. That's my opinion. Let's look at another example of David as Robin Hood. 1 Samuel 23:1. Then they told David, saying, look, the Philistines are fighting against Keilah. That's a town in somewhere in the middle of Israel. And they're robbing the threshing floors. Now that's where they take the grain after they brought it, and they get the husk off so it's edible and cookable and usable as food. So as they were getting the grain ready, the Philistines came, they're tough warriors, and they just took it from the people. Well, if you starve, that's your problem. The world was pretty cruel. Well, most of the world's history. The strong took from the weak, and that was the way things were. And probably Saul, instead of guarding his nation, was more interested in getting David than taking care of the nation, probably. Anyway, the Philistines are fighting against Keilah, and they're robbing the threshing floors, taking their grain. Therefore, David inquired of the Lord, saying, shall I go and attack the Philistines? And God said to David, go, save Keilah. But David's men said, wait a minute, we're having a hard time avoiding Saul's army here in Judah. We're going deeper into Israel. You want us to go deeper in? And David said, yes, God says, let's do it. In other words, they're going into more dangerous territory for them. And they went in there. Verse 4, then David inquired, Lord, once again. Lord answered, arise and go down to Keilah, and I'll deliver you. So he went down there, and his army kind of divided into two groups. That's a nice story. And they ambushed and ran off the Philistines and saved the people's food. Another heroic. By the way, and then the people of Keilah double-crossed David, and under pressure. Probably taught David some lessons about the fickleness of human nature, too. Well, let me read verse 5. David and his men went to Keilah, fought with the Philistines, struck them with a mighty blow, and took away their livestock. So David saved the inhabitants of Keilah. They're not going to starve because of David. See, David is like Robin Hood, great adventures. And I believe he learned the treachery of human nature. If he had been in a palace all those 15 years, I don't think David pampered, he wouldn't have been the great man that he was. And I believe he'll understand that even more when he gets in the kingdom of God. By the way, David probably did not know it would take 15 years to get an undivided crown. I don't think, and David probably asked more than once, God, what's taking so long? But he trusted God that somehow God knew what he was doing. 1 Samuel 24:4, another thing happened to David. Then David was in a cave hiding from Saul, and the king came in, Saul came in by himself to go to the bathroom in this cave. David's men were hiding in the back, and of course they said, God has answered your prayer. Just let us go. We will strike him down with one blow, and that'll be it. You'll be the king. That probably wouldn't have happened, but I want you to read it. 1 Samuel 24:4. Then the men of David said to him, this is the day in which the Lord said to you, behold, I will deliver your enemy into your hand. They're misapplying God's words, but that's understandable. That you may do to him as it seems good to you. David arose, but he just cut off the skirt of Saul's robe while he slept. Verse 6, and he said to his men, the Lord forbid, or probably it's translated Jehovah or Jehovah, forbid that I should do this thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, and stretch out my hand against him, seeing he is the anointed of the Lord. David was tested twice in this way, and both times he passed the test. And what did David learn? He learned to trust God to give him the crown and not to get it himself, not through an assassination. In the world in which David lived, and even much of our world, people get the top job by assassinating the guy on top, in front of him. They do it all the time. You read some history books, it's nothing but he poisoned the king, he killed him in his bed at night, he hired 2 assassins, and that's how he got to be the throne. Or El Presidente was his number 1 lieutenant, got a coup and shot him, and he's now the new leader. Even in the modern world, you know how Stalin got to be the master of the Soviet Union? He murdered all the other members of the ruling Politburo after Lenin died until he was the only one left. And then he murdered anybody he thought was even looking like they might be important. I mean, actually gruesome stuff that Stalin did. Hitler did the same thing, called the Night of Long Knives, where he murdered the guy who ran the stormtrooper army to help him get to power. So assassination is the worldly way to get to power. David learned not to do that. Wait for God to give it to him. And that was an important lesson I think God wanted him to learn. To trust God, even when things aren't going your way, even when you're an outlaw, trust God. He knows what he's doing. We can't see it, because David had no idea when this would end. I mean, we can now, it's like when you got the end of the story, you can look back and say, oh, it wasn't so bad. But look at it from David's point of view. He didn't know when it was going to end. He had no idea, but he was trusting God. And that's the point I want to make. We must also learn to trust that God knows best, no matter whether we can figure it out or not, whether we know what God is doing. Even if you say, I can see no reason for God allowing me to endure these hard knocks. And I can understand it. You're asking yourself, I don't see anything I'm benefiting from whatever I'm experiencing. God should make it easier. And I look at how a person I know came into God's church. It was tough on them, the way they came in. It was actually Natalie's case. Her parents really battled her going to the Passover. It made it really hard on her. But actually, it made her stronger. You just got to think about it, and you'll see what I mean. Certainly she would have preferred them to be cooperative and easy, but her dad loved her and thought she was going to a cult. You know how that is. Overprotective dad. I'm sure he didn't see it that way, but my point is, sometimes when you run into hard knocks, God knows what he's doing. It's good for you. But remember one thing in conclusion. Remember that God loves you, and everything he does is for our good, or even things he allows us to fall into are for our good. Believe it, know it, and trust God.